Admiral Iran stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Supremacy, watching the endless darkness of space through the massive observation window. Behind him, dozens of officers worked at their stations, monitoring the border between the Empire and the empty space beyond. It was a quiet day. Most days were quiet. The Empire had conquered so many species that few dared to challenge them anymore. The Empire stretched across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. They controlled over 200 species, billions of worlds, and trillions of citizens. Their fleet numbered in the tens of thousands. No one had seriously threatened them in generations. Iran was old now, his scales turning gray at the edges. He had served the Empire for 60 years, rising through the ranks through loyalty and survival. He remembered the days when the Empire was still growing, still hungry. He also remembered the days when the Empire learned that some prey bites back. "Admiral," a young officer called out, his voice uncertain. "We are detecting a vessel crossing into Imperial space." Iran did not turn around. Ships crossed borders all the time. Traders, smugglers, lost travelers. Identify it and send a patrol to intercept. "Sir, it is not a trading vessel." The officer's voice grew strange. "It appears to be a warship." Now Iran turned. "A warship here." The only species with warships capable of reaching this sector was. No, it could not be. The treaty had held for 40 years. "Show me," he commanded. The main display flickered to life, showing a sensor readout of the approaching vessel. It was large, almost as large as his own flagship. Its design was blocky and functional, without the elegant curves that shipbuilders favored. Every surface bristled with weapon ports, sensor arrays, and armor plating. It looked like something built for one purpose only: war. "It is human," the sensor officer confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. The command deck fell silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing. Even the constant hum of the ship's system seemed to fade. Human. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. "One ship," someone said, trying to laugh. "One ship against the Imperial fleet. They must be lost, or insane." But no one else laughed. The older officers, the ones who had served as long as Iran, did not smile. They knew better. "Get me a full identification," Iran ordered. His hearts were beating faster now, 4 chambers pumping cold blood through his aging body. "I want to know exactly which ship that is." The sensor officer worked frantically at his console. Seconds passed. Then his scales turned pale, almost white. "Admiral, it is the UNS Perseverance, Tempest-class dreadnought, one of their oldest vessels still in service." He paused, swallowing hard. "She was at the Battle of Sreach." Iran closed his eyes. Sreach. The worst defeat in Imperial history. A defeat so complete that the Empire had erased it from public records, pretending it never happened. But he remembered. He had been there, a junior officer on a supply ship, watching from a safe distance as the human fleet tore through the Imperial armada like fire through paper. The Perseverance had led that assault. He had watched it destroy 3 Imperial battleships in less than a minute, moving through the chaos with terrible precision. It was smaller than them, weaker than them on paper, but it fought like something possessed by demons. "How many ships do we have in this sector?" Iran asked. 12,000 combat-ready vessels, Admiral, plus orbital defenses, fighter stations, and—" "It will not be enough." Every officer stared at him. The young ones looked confused. The old ones looked sick. "Admiral," a captain spoke up, "surely you cannot be serious. One ship, however legendary, cannot threaten an entire sector fleet. We could destroy it with a fraction of our forces." "Could we?" Iran turned to face his officers, letting them see the fear he no longer bothered to hide. "Let me tell you something about humans, Captain, something they do not teach in the academy anymore. During the First Contact War, we outnumbered them 50 to 1. We had better technology, more resources, more ships. We thought we would crush them in weeks." He walked slowly across the deck. his claws clicking against the metal floor. We were wrong. Every tactic we used, they countered within days. Every weapon we deployed, they learned to defeat within weeks. They did not fight like any species we had ever conquered. They did not follow logical patterns. They did not retreat when they should have. They did not surrender when they were beaten. He stopped at the main display, staring at the image of the Perseverance. They fought with a creativity that terrified our generals. They sacrificed themselves in ways that made no sense, taking risks that should have been suicidal, and somehow they survived. And when they finally pushed back, Oran's voice dropped to barely a whisper. When they pushed back, they did not stop. They did not negotiate. They burned 3 of our fortress worlds to ash in a single week, not conquered, not occupied, burned, as a message. The command deck was completely silent now. The war ended because the humans offered peace, not because we were winning, because they decided they had made their point. Oran turned back to his officers. That ship out there is not lost. It is not insane. It is here for a reason. And until we know what that reason is, we will not fire a single shot. But Admiral, that is an order. He returned to his command chair and activated the communication system. All stations, this is Admiral Oran. Initiate full information lockdown. Nothing about this incident leaves the sector. Contact Imperial Command through secure channels only. Tell them the humans are here. Hours passed. The Perseverance continued moving through Imperial space, heading deeper into their territory. It did not respond to any hails. It did not slow down. It did not deviate from its course. Oran watched it pass through defensive lines that should have stopped any fleet. His commanders asked for permission to attack, to test the human ship's defenses, to at least force it to respond. Every request. It wants us to attack, he told them. It is waiting for us to give it a reason. The Perseverance's course became clear as it continued forward. It was heading for the Imperial capital. It was heading for Prime, the heart of the Empire, the seat of the Emperor himself. One ship, cutting through the most powerful military force in the known galaxy, and no one could stop it. Not because they lacked the firepower, but because everyone who tried to stop the humans 40 years ago was dead now, and everyone who survived remembered exactly how they died. Oran sent his message to the Emperor. Then he sat in his chair and watched the human warship grow smaller on his sensors as it moved away, unstoppable, unresponsive, unafraid. "What do they want?" his first officer asked quietly. "I do not know," Oran admitted. "But whatever it is, we should pray we can give it to them, because the alternative," he shook his head slowly, "the alternative does not bear thinking about." The Perseverance disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a sector full of warships that did not dare to follow. And across the Empire, as word began to spread through unofficial channels, a species that had conquered hundreds of others began to feel something they had not felt in generations. Fear. The Imperial Palace on Prime was the largest structure in the known galaxy. It covered an entire continent, its towers reaching so high they touched the edge of space. 1 billion servants worked within its walls. 10 million soldiers guarded its gates. It was meant to show the universe that the Empire was eternal, unbreakable, supreme. Today it felt very small. Emperor Ix sat upon the crystal throne, looking down at his gathered advisors. They filled the great hall below him, hundreds of the most powerful beings in the Empire, and most of them were arguing. The sound of their voices bounced off the ancient walls, creating a chaos of noise that gave a headache. "Silence," he commanded, and the hall fell quiet. Even emperors grew tired of endless debate. "High Marshal, you called this emergency session. Explain." The High Marshal was the oldest person in the room. He had served 4 emperors, fought in a dozen wars, and carried scars on his scales that told stories of battles most had forgotten. He walked slowly to the center of the hall, his movements stiff with age but his eyes still sharp. "19 hours ago," began, "a human warship crossed into our space. It has since traveled through 6 sectors past 2 defensive fleets and is now approaching the inner systems. It has not fired a weapon. It has not responded to communications. It has simply moved forward." The younger advisors laughed. One of them, a wealthy noble named, stood up with a sneer on his face. "One ship. This is your emergency, old man. One ship against the greatest empire in history." He gestured dramatically at the ceiling. "We have more warships than there are stars in the sky. We could destroy this human toy with a thought." Several others nodded in agreement. They were young, these new leaders. They had grown up in an era of easy conquest, where the empire crushed all resistance without effort. They had never seen a real war. They had never faced an enemy that fought back. "Then why haven't you?" asked quietly. The laughter died, smile faded. "The ship has passed through the territory of 12 fleet admirals," continued. "All of them veterans, all of them with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Not one of them fired. Do you know why?" He did not wait for an answer. "Because they remember. They remember what happened 40 years ago when we thought the same thing you think now. They remember what it cost us." Activated a display in the center of the hall. Images appeared, old recordings from military archives that had been sealed for decades. Ships burning, planets on fire, soldiers running, screaming, dying. "The First Contact War," said. "We do not teach it in schools anymore. We do not speak of it in public. We pretend it never happened, but I was there. I watched it with my own eyes, and I have never forgotten." He walked through the holographic images like a ghost, moving through memories. "It started when we found a human colony world called New Helsinki, a small planet poorly defended, far from their main territory. We thought it would be easy. We sent a conquest fleet of 500 ships to claim it." The display showed warships descending on a blue and green world. "The humans had 12 ships defending that planet. 12. Our admirals laughed. They expected surrender within hours." The images changed. Fire explosions, ships breaking apart. The humans did not surrender. They fought. They fought in ways we had never seen before. When we destroyed their ships, they rammed ours. When we landed troops, they ambushed us with weapons we did not recognize. When we thought we had won, they came back with new tactics we could not predict. His voice grew heavy with old pain. "We took that planet eventually. It cost us 300 ships and 1,000,000 soldiers for one small colony world. And then the humans responded." The display showed something new now. Human ships different from the ones before, bigger, darker, built for revenge. They did not negotiate, they did not threaten, they simply came, and they did not stop until they had burned 3 of our fortress worlds to the ground, not conquered, not occupied, burned, sterilized, made into examples. The hall was silent, even had nothing to say. "I watched the Battle of Reach," said. "I was on a command ship coordinating fleet movements. We had 1,000 vessels against their 200, superior numbers, superior technology. We should have crushed them." He closed his eyes. "They destroyed us, not defeated, destroyed. Their ships moved like nothing I had ever seen. They predicted our tactics before we used them. They found weaknesses in our formations that we did not know existed. In 6 hours, they reduced our fleet to scattered survivors fleeing for their lives. I only escaped because they let me." He opened his eyes and looked directly at Emperor. "The war ended when the humans offered peace. They could have pushed further. Our intelligence reports suggested they could have reached Prime itself. But they stopped. They offered terms. We accepted those terms faster than any treaty in our history." "Why?" asked. "Why did they stop?" "Because they had made their point. They showed us what they could do if they chose to, and they chose mercy instead." Shook his head. "That was what frightened me most, Your Majesty. Not their weapons, not their tactics, their choice. They could have ended us and they decided not to. which means they could decide differently next time. The display faded. The hall remained silent. "That ship out there," said the Perseverance. "It was at its reach. I watched it kill 3 of our battleships in less than a minute. It is one of their oldest vessels, battered and it is coming here alone because the humans do not need to send a fleet. They sent a message instead." "What message?" asked. "That is what we need to find out, Your Majesty, before we do something foolish. Because the humans did not forget what we did to them 40 years ago. They remember everything. And if that ship is here, it means we have done something to remind them." A messenger rushed into the hall, interrupting the silence. He looked terrified. "Your Majesty, the human ship. It has passed through the 7th Fleet without stopping. Admiral Eth did not engage. He moved his ships aside and let it pass." Stared at the messenger. "He let it pass?" "Yes, Your Majesty," he said. He said he recognized the ship's designation. He remembered what it did to his father's fleet. He chose not to give his crews the same death. Nodded slowly, unsurprised. "The old soldiers remember. They will not fire. They know what happens when you poke a sleeping predator." Emperor Ix looked around his great hall, at his advisors, at the mighty heart of his eternal empire. And for the first time in his reign, he felt truly afraid. "Find out why they are here," he ordered. "Find out what they want before it is too late." But deep in his hearts, he already suspected the answer. The humans were coming because the Empire had done something wrong, and humans, unlike did not forgive easily. They did not forget at all. The bridge of the UNS Perseverance was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of systems and the occasional beep of sensors. Captain stood at the center of it all, her hands clasped behind her back, watching the endless field of stars through the main viewport. She was a tall woman, thin and hard, with gray streaking through her dark hair. Lines marked her face, earned through decades of service and burdens that never quite faded. She had commanded this ship for 15 years, but her connection to it went back much further. Her grandmother had survived New Helsinki. "Captain," her first officer said, a broad-shouldered man named, "we're approaching the 7th Sector defensive line. 30 warships holding formation ahead." "I see them. Did not move. Maintain course and speed." "They're charging weapons." "They won't fire." Looked at her with uncertainty but said nothing. He had served under long enough to trust her judgment, even when it seemed like madness. The Perseverance continued forward. On the screens they could see the fleet spreading out, trying to form a blockade. Their ships were impressive, sleek and powerful, bristling with weapon systems that could crack a planet's crust. Against any other enemy, they would have been terrifying. But the Perseverance did not slow down. Minutes passed. The distance closed. Could see the details of individual ships now, the markings on their hulls, the glow of their engines. She could imagine the officers on those bridges, sweating, arguing, trying to decide what to do. Captain said quietly, "They're moving." The fleet was splitting apart. Ships pulled away from the center, opening a gap in their formation. A path. They were letting the Perseverance through. "They remember," said softly. "Their admirals are old enough to remember." She felt no satisfaction in that, only a deep, tired sadness. The Perseverance slid through the gap, passing close enough to a battleship that they could see crew members staring out of viewports. The alien faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. They watched the human ship pass like villagers watching a dragon fly overhead. "We're through," reported. "No pursuit." Nodded. "How long until we reach prime?" "At current speed, 72 hours. Then we continue." She turned away from the viewport and walked to her ready room, a small private space off the main bridge. Inside, she sat down at her desk and activated a personal display. An image appeared, a photograph of a world covered in green forests and blue oceans. Beautiful, peaceful. Of the She had never visited it in person, but she knew its history by heart. They had been humanity's first alien friends. When humans were still learning to navigate the stars, still frightened and alone, they had found them. They had shared star charts and medical knowledge and technology, asking nothing in return. They had welcomed humanity into the galactic community with open arms. They had been kind. In a universe full of predators and conquerors, they had chosen kindness. And now they were dying. Pulled up another file, this one marked with the highest security classification. It contained intercepted communications, stolen intelligence reports, and hidden recordings smuggled out by refugees. She had read it 100 times. It still made her sick. The Empire had conquered the 3 years ago. They had called it a protective integration in their official statements. The reality was genocide. They were being systematically erased, their culture destroyed, their people sent to relocation camps from which no one ever returned. 1 month ago, a final transmission had escaped the information blockade. A desperate plea from the last free, begging anyone who could hear to help them. Begging humanity to remember that they were friends once. Humanity remembered. The United Nations Space Command had debated for weeks. Some wanted to send the entire fleet. Others wanted to negotiate, to try diplomacy first. In the end, they compromised. They would send one ship, one message, one chance for them to make this right without starting another war. They chose the Perseverance because of what it meant, because they would recognize it, because fear could be a weapon too, sometimes more effective than any gun. Closed the files and looked at a different image. This one showed an old woman with kind eyes and deep scars, smiling at the camera. Her grandmother, Maria, one of the 12,000 survivors of New Helsinki out of a population of 3 million. Maria had never spoken about the war. She had never talked about what she saw, what she lost, what she did to survive. But she had taught one thing over and over until it was burned into her soul. We must never become what we fight against, she used to say. The day we do, we have already lost. Touch the image gently. We're doing this right, abuela, she whispered. We're going to give them a chance, a real chance. That's more than they gave you. She returned to the bridge. Her crew looked at her with steady eyes. 4,000 men and women, all volunteers, all knowing they might not come back from this mission. None of them had complained. None of them had asked to leave. Status report, ordered. All systems nominal, replied. They are tracking us from long range but maintaining distance. No hostile actions detected. Good, any response to our presence? Lots of communications traffic. Encrypted, but our analysis suggests widespread panic. They're scared, Captain, really scared. Nodded slowly. They should be, but not for the reason they think. She walked to the main viewport again, staring at the darkness ahead. Somewhere out there, they were suffering. Somewhere out there, an empire was deciding whether to do the right thing or face the consequences. You know, said, stepping up beside her, when I was a kid, my mother used to tell me stories about how they found us when we were lost, how they helped us without asking for anything. She said they proved that the universe wasn't as cold and cruel as we feared. Remained silent, listening. I keep thinking about them, continued, wondering if any of them are still alive, wondering if they've given up hope. They haven't, said quietly. They sent that message. They still believe someone will come for them. Will someone? She turned to look at him, and there was iron in her eyes. Someone already has. The Perseverance continued its silent voyage, passing through the heart of the greatest empire in the galaxy. Behind it, fear spread like ripples in a pond. Ahead of it, an emperor waited, not knowing that his choices in the next few days would determine the fate of his entire civilization. And aboard the ship, 4,000 humans held their course, driven by something they had never truly understood. Not revenge, not conquest, not pride. Simply the belief that some things were worth fighting for, Some people were worth protecting, and some debts could never be forgotten. That had given humanity hope when they needed it most. Now humanity would return the favor. The shuttle descended through the clouds of Prime, carrying a single passenger toward the Imperial Palace. Captain sat alone in the small cabin, wearing her formal uniform, her hands resting calmly on her knees. Through the window, she could see the palace growing larger, a mountain of stone and metal that stretched beyond the horizon. It was meant to intimidate visitors, to make them feel small and insignificant before the might of the Empire. Felt nothing. The shuttle landed on a platform reserved for important guests. As the doors opened, she saw what awaited her: 10,000 Imperial guards standing in perfect rows, their weapons polished and their armor gleaming. They formed a corridor leading to the palace entrance, a path of soldiers designed to remind her that she was alone and surrounded. She stepped out and began walking. The guards watched her pass with cold eyes. Many of them were young, bred for war but never having seen real combat. They looked at this small human woman with confusion. This was the threat. This was what had thrown the Empire into chaos. But some of the guards were older, veterans. They did not look confused. They looked at the way prey looks at a predator, waiting for it to strike. She walked for almost an hour through the palace, through halls larger than cities, past statues of ancient emperors, beneath ceilings painted with scenes of glorious conquest. Servants and nobles stopped to stare. Whispers followed her like shadows. Finally, she reached the throne room. It was the largest enclosed space she had ever seen. The ceiling was so high it vanished into darkness. The floor was made of polished black stone that reflected everything like a mirror, and at the far end, raised on a platform of crystal and gold, sat Emperor IX. He was old, his scales dull with age, but his eyes were sharp. He wore robes of purple and silver, the colors of the imperial bloodline. Around him stood his advisors, his generals, his priests, the most powerful beings in the known galaxy, all gathered to witness this moment. Walked toward him without hurrying. Her footsteps echoed in the vast space. She stopped at the proper distance, close enough to speak but far enough to show respect. She did not bow. "Captain," Emperor said, his voice carrying through the hall, "commander of the human vessel Perseverance, you have violated our space, ignored our hails, and threatened our peace. What do you have to say for yourself?" Looked up at him without fear. "I am here to deliver a message from the United Nations of Earth," she said. "I am also here to ask questions, questions that deserve honest answers." "You presume to demand things from the Empire," one of the advisors snarled. "One ship against our million. You are in no position to demand anything." "Perhaps," replied calmly. "Then let us call them requests instead. Will you hear them?" The Emperor raised a hand, silencing his advisor. He was curious despite himself. This human showed no fear, no desperation. She stood before the heart of his empire as if she belonged there. "Speak," he said. Reached into her uniform and pulled out a small device. She activated it, and a holographic display appeared in the air between them. Images, documents, recordings. 3 years ago, the Empire invaded the. Your official records describe this as a protective integration, a peaceful absorption of a primitive species into the greater empire. The display showed something different: burning cities, refugees fleeing, soldiers dragging families from their homes. Our intelligence tells a different story. They did not ask for protection. They did not welcome integration. They resisted, and they were crushed. Their leaders were executed. Their children were taken to facilities where they were taught to forget their own culture. Their population has decreased by 40% in 3 years. The throne room was silent. Many of the advisors looked uncomfortable. Some looked angry. A few looked ashamed. "They are not the only ones," continued. "In the past decade, your empire has absorbed 14 other species using similar methods, conquest dressed as charity, genocide disguised as education. "These are internal matters," Emperor said, his voice cold. "The affairs of the Empire are not the concern of humans. They are our concern." His voice did not rise, but it grew harder. "When humanity first left Earth, when we were young and frightened and alone in the universe, they found us. They did not conquer us. They did not exploit us. They welcomed us. They shared their knowledge freely, expecting nothing in return. They showed us that the galaxy did not have to be cruel." She stepped closer to the throne. "We do not forget our friends, Emperor, and we do not abandon them." One of the generals stepped forward, his hand on his weapon. "Is this a threat? You threaten the Empire with one ship." "I threaten nothing, I inform." Turned to face him. "The Perseverance is not alone, it was simply first. Behind me, waiting at the border, are more ships, many more. We do not want war. We did not come here to conquer or punish. We came to offer you a choice." "What choice?" asked. Release all the species you have taken against their will. Allow them to return to their worlds, to rebuild their cultures, to live as free peoples. Do this, and we will leave in peace. We will even help you negotiate treaties, establish trade, build something better than what you have now." The Emperor leaned forward. "And if we refuse?" Was silent for a moment. "Then we will not invade. We will not occupy. We will simply ensure that the Empire never threatens anyone else again. You know what we are capable of. Your oldest soldiers remember. Your history, however much you try to hide it, remembers. You cannot destroy an empire with a handful of ships," the advisor named sneered. Turned to look at him with eyes that had seen too much. "We destroyed 3 of your fortress worlds in a week when we were angry. We have not been angry in 40 years. We have spent that time building, growing, preparing, not for conquest, for protection, for moments exactly like this one." She faced the Emperor again. "One ship crossed your entire empire, and no one stopped it. Your admirals moved aside because they knew what would happen if they didn't. Imagine what happens when we send 1,000 ships. Imagine what happens when we stop holding back." The throne room was completely silent. "We do not want this," said, and her voice softened. "Humanity has spent centuries wrestling with its own violent nature. We have not conquered it, but we have learned to choose differently. We could have destroyed your empire 40 years ago. We chose mercy instead. We are offering that choice again." She took a step back. Make this right, and we can find a different path forward. That is our request, Emperor. Consider it carefully." She turned and began walking back toward the entrance, her footsteps echoing in the silence. "Wait," the Emperor called. "How do we know you will keep your word? How do we know this is not a trick?" Stopped, she looked back over her shoulder. "You don't, but 40 years ago we offered peace when we could have chosen annihilation. We kept that word. We have kept it ever since. That is who we are, Emperor. That is who we choose to be." She resumed walking. "We will wait at the edge of your system for 3 days. When you have made your decision, send word." She disappeared through the great doors, leaving behind an emperor and his court, all of them faced with a choice they had never expected to make. And in the silence that followed, even the most arrogant among them began to understand something that the veterans had known all along. The humans were not threatening them. They were giving them one last chance. 3 days felt like 3 years. Emperor Ix had not slept since the human captain left his throne room. He spent his nights walking through the palace gardens, staring up at the stars, knowing that somewhere out there a single ship was waiting for him to decide the fate of everything he had ever known. The council met again and again, arguing until voices grew hoarse and tempers burned out. The younger advisors demanded war. They spoke of honor, of strength, of the empire's reputation. They painted pictures of glorious victory, of human ships burning, of the galaxy learning once more to fear the older advisors said nothing. They simply looked at their emperor with tired eyes, waiting for him to understand what they already knew. On the second day, High Marshal came to him privately. "Your Majesty," the old soldier said, "I have served this throne for longer than most of your advisors have been alive. I have fought in wars you have never heard of. I have seen empires rise and fall. And I am asking you, not as your marshal, but as someone who has seen too much death, please consider what you are being offered." "They ask us to surrender," said bitterly, "to give up worlds we have conquered, peoples we have absorbed, to admit weakness before the entire galaxy. They ask you to release prisoners you never should have taken." His voice was firm. "They ask you to stop a genocide that stains our honor more than any defeat ever could. There is no glory in what we have done to Your Majesty. There is only shame we have been too proud to admit." The emperor turned away. "And if we refuse, if we call their bluff?" "Then they will not be bluffing," sat down heavily, his old bones creaking. "I have been gathering intelligence on human military strength since this began. What we know terrifies me. What we don't know terrifies me more." He activated a display, showing charts and estimates. The humans have settled over 800 worlds. Their population is more than 90 billion. They have been at peace for 200 years, which means all their resources, all their industry, all their genius has gone into building and preparing rather than fighting. Our estimates suggest their current fleet could outnumber ours by a factor of 10, perhaps more. Stared at the numbers. "That cannot be right, we would have seen such a build-up." "They are not like us, Your Majesty. They do not threaten. They do not display their strength to intimidate others. They simply build quietly, patiently, and they wait. During the First Contact War, they used less than 1% of their total capacity. We have never seen their true power. No one has." The emperor sat down, suddenly feeling very old. "If I agree to their demands, I will be remembered as the emperor who surrendered to a single ship. My legacy will be weakness." "If you refuse their demands, you may not have a legacy at all," leaned forward. "Your Majesty, I watched human ships tear through our fleets like they were made of paper. I watched them burn worlds without hesitation when they believed it necessary. And then I watched them offer peace when they could have destroyed us completely. They are not conquerors seeking territory. They are protectors seeking justice. That makes them far more dangerous than any enemy we have ever faced." He stood slowly. "The choice is yours, Your Majesty. But choose knowing this. The humans do not forget and they do not forgive easily. If you refuse, they will come. Not tomorrow, perhaps not next year, but they will come. And when they do, there will be no second chance." He bowed and left the emperor alone with his thoughts. On the third day, IX summoned his council for the final time. The throne room was packed. Everyone who mattered in the empire had come to witness this moment. Nobles and generals, priests and scholars, all waiting to hear what their emperor would say. Looked at them from his crystal throne. He saw the eager young faces demanding war, the weary old faces praying for peace, and the frightened middle-aged faces who did not know what to think. He saw an empire that had grown fat on conquest, that had forgotten what it meant to struggle, that believed its own legends of invincibility. He saw a civilization standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for him to decide whether to step back or fall. "I have made my decision," he announced. The room fell silent. "The peoples known as and all other species integrated into our empire within the past century will be granted independence. They will be allowed to return to rebuild their cultures, to live as they choose. The empire will provide resources to aid in their recovery as payment for the difficulties of their integration." Chaos erupted. Younger advisors shouted in protest. Generals demanded to know if the emperor had lost his mind. Only the old veterans remained silent, their faces showing relief rather than shame. "Silence!" roared, and his voice cut through the noise like thunder. "I am your emperor. I have made my decision. Those who disagree may challenge me for the throne, as is our way. Those who cannot accept my rule may leave." No one moved. No one challenged. In the end, even the proudest of them knew better than to stand against an emperor who had made up his mind. "Send word to the human ship," commanded. "Tell them we accept their terms, arrange for negotiations, and tell them," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "tell them we hope this can be the beginning of something better than what came before." The message was sent. Hours later, a response came back, simple, direct. "We accept. We will send diplomats to discuss the details. The Perseverance will remain until the first are released as a gesture of good faith. We look forward to building peace together." Captain received the news on her bridge. Her crew cheered, some of them crying with relief. They had done it. Against all odds, against an empire of trillions, they had done it without firing a single shot. Stood beside her, grinning broadly. "We actually did it. I can't believe we actually did it." Allowed herself a small smile. "This is just the beginning. The hard work comes next. Treaties to negotiate, refugees to relocate, old wounds to heal. It will take decades. But we have decades now, thanks to you, thanks to this ship." Looked out at Prime, the jewel of an empire that had chosen fear over pride. "Not thanks to me. Thanks to everyone who came before us. Everyone who taught us that strength without mercy is just cruelty, and that the measure of a civilization is how it treats the powerless." She thought of her grandmother, of Maria, who survived New Helsinki, who lost everything but still raised a family and taught them to be better than the violence that shaped her life. "We did this because someone had to," said quietly. "Because our friends were suffering and we could not look away. That is what it means to be human, not conquering, not dominating, simply refusing to abandon the people who need us." Months passed. The return to where they found their cities in ruins but their spirits unbroken. Human ships brought supplies, medical aid, and engineers to help rebuild. The first child born in freedom was named, after the captain who had crossed an empire to save them. Years later, a young historian sat down to write the story of her people's liberation. She struggled for days to find the right words, to capture what it meant to be enslaved and then freed, to be forgotten and then remembered. Finally, she wrote, "The humans have a saying, never again. For centuries, we thought it was a promise they made to themselves, a reminder of their own dark history and their determination to overcome it. But on the day the Perseverance appeared in our sky, we learned the truth. It was never just a promise to themselves. It was a promise to everyone, to every small species, every forgotten people, every victim waiting in darkness for someone to care. The humans made a promise to the universe and they kept it. They kept it for us. That is what they are. That is who they choose to be. And as long as they remember, as long as they keep choosing to be better than their nature, there will always be hope in the darkness. There will always be someone who comes when called. There will always be humanity." She finished writing and looked out her window at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Perseverance continued its eternal patrol, and battered but unbroken. Watching, protecting, remembering. Always.